We are on 22b, Chaf Beis Amud Beis, and we are continuing to question Rav Avo's principle. Rav Avo suggested that every time the Torah says do not eat, it includes not just eating, but also benefits. And we're going to ask him a number of other cases, a number of other different prohibitions where the Torah says do not eat, and the implication is it's just do not eat, and the implication is that benefits would be permitted, which is again a question on Rav Avo's principle. So, Chaf Beis Amud Beis, V'harei Ever Menachai. 22b1, first column, bottom of the page, bottom of the column. A limb taken from a living animal. Okay, there's a prohibition against eating a limb taken from a living animal. That is a prohibition, one of the few prohibitions, which is applicable both for Jews. It's one of the mitzvahs, but it's also one of the Shiva mitzvahs. Beinoach. It's applicable to non-Jews as well. Okay, so Ever Menachai, again, a limb taken from a living animal. The pasuk says below, Sochal hanefesh im habasar. You should not eat the life with the flesh. Again, the word ochel, do not eat, which again, based on Rav's principle, should mean do not eat and do not benefit from. Vitanya, and yet it was Tana Brisa, Rabbi Nassan Omer, Minayin shlo yoshid adam kos yain nazar. From where do we learn that you are not allowed to give a cup of wine to a nazar? Nazar is not allowed to drink wine, not allowed to go, hey, would you like to have a bottle of wine? You can't do that. And you're also not allowed to give a limb from a living animal to a non-Jew, again, who is prohibited in having Ever Menachai. Where do you learn that from? We learn it from the pasuk, do not place a stumbling block in front of the blind. We don't take that pasuk literally. Doesn't mean you shouldn't place a block in front of a blind person. It means don't trip someone up. Don't cause someone to go ahead and sin. Okay, so what do we see from there? What do you see from there? From that pasuk of lifnei iver, that means you can't give it to someone who's going to go ahead and sin. But let's say it's a being who would not sin, meaning haliklavim shari. The implication is I can't give it to a non-Jew because he's not allowed to eat Ever Menachai. But if I want to give it to my dog, I'm allowed to do so. Right? That's the implication of the Bryce. The Bryce doesn't say it's forbidden having any benefits, right? Which would, of course, include giving it to a non-Jew. What it says is, don't give it to a non-Jew because he's not allowed to eat it. But implication is, I am allowed to go ahead and give it to a dog, right? That means the dog's allowed to...
That's a benefit, giving it to your dog.
Of course. I'm saving myself a whole bunch of box of Chewies or whatever they're called, yeah? So the bottom line is, so we see from there that Ever Menachai, although the pasuk says do not eat, it means specifically do not eat, but benefit is permitted. So the Gemara says no. Shani Ever Menachai itzkish lidam. Ever Menachai there is a hekish. Hekish means it's juxtaposed to the prohibition of blood, okay? And we already established when it comes to blood, based on blood's association with water, that was yesterday's learning, that because it's associated with water, that blood you cannot eat, but you're allowed to benefit from it. And so Even Machai, which is also hutzkash, it is juxtaposed with blood, has the same halacha as blood, that just like blood only cannot be eaten, but it can be benefited from, so too Even Machai. Where do we see that? The pasuk says, Rak chazak, be strong, levilti achol hadam and adam hu anefesh, do not eat blood, for the blood is life, and that pasuk is side by side with the prohibition against Ever min hachai. Okay, so bottom line is, we see from there, so therefore the question has been resolved. Rav Avo, who says that don't eat should include do not benefit, we see by Ever Menachai you are allowed to benefit. I'm not allowed to give it to a non-Jew because of lifnei iver, but I'm allowed to give it to my dog, I'm allowed to benefit from it in other ways. That's because Ever Menachai is hutzkash, it is juxtaposed to blood. Now the Gemara goes back to Chizkiah. Remember, Chizkiah was the bar plupta, he was the one who argued with Rav Avo, and Chizkiah said when it says don't eat, it means don't eat. That's all it includes. So now we have to ask according to Chizkiah. According to Chizkiah, says that anytime it says don't eat, all it means don't eat. So according to him, what does he learn by the placement of blood next to Ever Menachai? What do you learn from there? Amar Lach, he'll tell you Damhu de itkish lever Menachai, that it's actually the other way around. That blood is we're learning something about blood from Ever Menachai. What? How so? Ma Ever Menachai aser, just like taking a limb from a living animal is prohibited. Af dam hu chai menachai aser. So too blood from a living animal is also prohibited. Okay, in other words, there's different types of blood. There's blood from a dead animal, right? And then there's blood from a living animal, and we're learning that just like Ever Menachai, the punishment for eating Ever Menachai, a limb from a living animal, is kares, highest level of punishment. So too, if you have blood from a living animal, you're going to have the punishment of kares. Okay, ve'ezeh, which blood is this? Zedam hakazesh hanefesh yotzebo. This is a bloodletting through which the soul departs. Okay, so basically, in the bloodletting process, which is quite common back in the day, both for people and for animals, there are a couple of different steps and different types of blood that start flowing, and beginning it's a trickle, then it starts going much more. There's a whole discussion in, I think it's Christos, Christos, that where it discusses like which part of the blood are we talking about. But the bottom line is that the Chizkiah is saying that the reason that Ever Menachai is placed side by side with the prohibition against eating blood teach you that there is a chi of kares, that although all types of animal blood are usher, you cannot have them, but there's a unique unique punishment of kares for a specific type of blood that comes from a live animal, and that is this blood which is referred to as the blood of bloodletting through which the soul departs. Okay, but the bottom line is Chizkiah also has some learning, some limud, some teaching from the Hekesh, from the juxtaposition of the two together. Okay,
they didn't have to though.
They didn't have to.
We say, they just don't learn from it. So it's interesting that they.
Correct. Seems like they accept that there is a Masorah. Correct. They accept that there's a Masorah, that there's such a Hekesh. That's right. Okay. Vareshar Niskal. What about an ox that is to be stoned? Excuse me. What that means is that you have an ox. Let's say an ox gores 3 people. Then the halacha is that you're going to go ahead and kill that ox. Okay, that's the halacha. The ox is stoned. So in such a case, the ox is to be stoned. Okay, you shall not eat its flesh. Okay, you cannot eat the flesh of this ox. It's forbidden to be eaten. The Vitanya, yet it was taught in Brisa, mashmash nemer sakal yisakal ashar. The fact that the pasuk says that the ox shall surely be stoned. In a nevela. How do I already know that this animal is an avela. In other words, the ox gets stoned, right? They throw it off of a high area, then they throw rocks on it, okay? Is the animal slaughtered? No, it is not. So, of course, I know I can't eat it, right? So the Brisa continues and says, unavela surabachila, right? So I already know that an avela is forbidden from eating, right? Because it's an avela, it's not slaughtered. Umatam alomar lo yachel. So what is the purpose of teaching me it shall not be eaten? To teach me that if the owner slaughters the ox after the sentence, in other words, let's say they have this court case about this ox, and 2 witnesses come in and say, I saw it gore 3 times, etc., and then the owner's like, I really wanted to eat this ox, and he quickly goes and slaughters it, right? Is he allowed to eat this meat? Usher, the Torah is coming to teach me that it is also forbidden to eat, right? Meaning, of course, again, the pasuk says the stoned ox cannot be eaten. And the Gemara asks, of course you can't eat a stoned ox. It's not slaughtered. You stoned it. You threw it off a second story. You threw rocks on it. That you never slaughtered it. Of course you can't eat it. The Gemara says, no. It's not talking about that case. It's talking about a case where a person goes ahead after we already paskined, after we already ruled that this is an animal that's supposed to be killed. The owner goes ahead and illegally slaughters it. To that, the Gemara says, since the psak was it should be killed, you cannot eat it. But then the Brisa continues. The Gemara says, "Ein li ela b'achila." The prohibition from this pasuk is saying, I cannot eat it. Bahanami nayin. How do I know that I cannot have benefit from it? Okay, so you see what's going on over here. The Gemara is saying that from the pasuk of lo yachel, it teaches me I cannot eat it. But how do I know that I'm not allowed to benefit from it? Tamalomar uvalashar naki. The pasuk also says that the owner of the ox shall be clean. Okay, my mashma. What is the implication of these words? Shimon ben Zoma Omer. He says, Ka'adam shomer lechavero, like a person says to his friend, Yatza ploni naki minachas. A person has gone clean of his possessions. Ve'ein lo behem adashal klum. He has no benefit from it. So basically saying that he's clean means that like you're cleaned out. You have nothing from it. So the words balashar naki teaches me that I'm also not allowed to have benefit from it. So what do you see from these psukim? That had it just said the words don't eat, that would imply don't eat. But we wouldn't know about not benefiting from it. You need the pasuk of balashar naki. You need that extra word, the extra statement to say he's also not allowed to have benefit from it. There's a question on Rav Avo, who said that don't eat already included benefit. Yeah, you with me? So the Gemara says, "Taima dekasav balashar naki." The fact that the Torah says the owner of the ox should be clean, di milo yachel, had it just said the words, "It shall not be eaten." Okay, Isra chila mashma, Isra nalo mashma. It would only imply a prohibition against eating. It would not imply a prohibition against deriving benefits. Okay, so again, this is the question. So the Gemara says, "Lo laolam lo yachel Isra chila v'Isra nalo mashma." Really, don't eat implies both. Uvalashar naki lanas oro hudaasa. The words balashar naki is coming for a very specific type of benefit, and that is do not benefit from the skin, from the hide of the animal. V'itzrich, and you need those words. Why? So good. I mean, I would have thought lo yachel es besor ksiv. It says you cannot eat its flesh. Besoro in, that means that if flesh you cannot eat or benefit from, oro lo. But its hide, you would think you're allowed to benefit from. Kamash balan, saying the owner of the ox is clean, comes to teach you that you're not allowed to benefit from the ox's hide. So again, let's just review quickly. The whole discussion again is about Rav Avo's premise that the words don't eat implies not only not eating and also not benefiting. Over here, when it comes to this ox which is supposed to be stoned, where the Brisa says don't eat is teaching me don't eat. Okay, and then you need another pasuk balashar naki telling me you can't have benefits. We're asking, according to Ravahu, why do we need another pasuk? But once it says lo yachel, I already know that I cannot eat it. Why do I need that I cannot have benefit from it? Why do I need the next pasuk? So Gemara says, you're right. The next pasuk is not teaching me about a prohibition against benefits. Rather, it's teaching me about a prohibition against benefit from a very particular thing which wasn't included in the original prohibition. It's talking about the hide of the animal, which is valuable. You make tefillin out of it. You make you make all leather things from it. To teach me that which wasn't included in the original lo yachel bisaro, that also is included in the prohibition against having benefits. Now the Gemara asked, wait a second, but there are other Tanaim, demapgile laha kra l'dresh achrina. There are other Tanaim, okay, a whole discussion of Bava Kama, who use this pasuk of Balab Sharnaki for other teachings. We're not going to get into them. L'chatzi kofer for something called half kofer, a half atonement payment, v'lid mei vlados, or involving the value of an aborted fetus when the animal kills another animal with a fetus. Hanas oram min alahu. So according to them who already use this words Bala Sharnaki, where do you learn that the benefit of the ox's hide is also prohibited? Where do they learn that from? Nafkalahu me es bisaro. It doesn't say flesh, it says es bisaro. Es is a word that doesn't really translate well in English. Es is almost like this superfluous word, which is sometimes found in psukim. So, and the Gemara learns from there, es hatafel livsaro. Things which are auxiliary, things which are adjacent to the flesh, but not just the flesh itself. So the fact that it says, do not eat, doesn't say do not eat bisaro. It says do not eat es bisaro. And es bisaro comes to include things which are adjacent to the flesh, i.e. the hide. Okay, bottom line is the question is resolved, and there is no question on Ravo's premise when it comes to the word lo yachel coming to include hana. Now the Gemara just goes on, goes on a bit of a tangent and says, v'idach, according to those who do not use the word ve'es, right? According to those who don't use the word ve'es to teach me about the hide, what do they use the word ve'es for? In other words, some learn it from a Bala Sharnaki, right? Some use the word Bala Sharnaki, teach me about the hide. Some don't use the word Bala Sharnaki. They use it for, not about the hide, they use it for something else. They used ve'es, teach me about the hide. So according to the one who still used Bala Sharnaki, what do they use with the word? What do they learn from the word ve'es? So Gemara says, es lo darish. They don't expound the word es. Again, es is like, it's kind of like an extra word. Some say it's meaningful, and some say it's just a word that's used, but doesn't actually have any unique teaching. And the Gemara then quotes a beautiful brisa, Kedetan is taught in the brisa, Shimon Hamsoni, a man by the name of Shimon Hamsoni, V'amri la, Nechemya Hamsoni, and there are those who say it's Nechemya from Hamson, Hayadorish called Esem Shabbatorah. They would learn every es in the Torah. Every time it said es, even though it's just like a word that's like almost like a filler word, every time he saw the word es, he said it must teach you something unique. And everyone he would learn something from it. Right? However, when he came to the pasuk, which we just read a few weeks ago, to es Hashem lakech hatira, Hashem your God you should fear, but the word es would tell you something like connected to Hashem your God. He says, Perish, he held back. He said, there's nothing that I could imply from that pasuk. In other words, if it's like es bisaro, something which is adjacent to your flesh, you say, okay, that means that you should, that included in the flesh prohibition, there's a prohibition against skin. But when you say fear God, what could possibly be included in that? It doesn't make sense to include anything in the fear of God. That's like utterly unique. You can't include something beyond God in such a commandment. So basically, he said, you know what? I'm wrong. Really, all the S's. He had a theory. In other words, let me explain. He's sitting in the base medrash, and one day he has a theory. The word S teaches me something. The word, whenever you see the word S, it can't be an extra letter in the word. In the Torah, it has to be teaching me something. And he goes and he learns all the S's in the Torah, and he says, this one teaches this one teaches that, this one teaches this one teaches that. But he comes to and he says, it doesn't work. My theory's wrong. And he drops it. And he drops his entire theory. Amrlo Tamidav, his students turn to him and they say, Rabbi, Kol Esem Shadarashta Matahelan. What's going to happen with all the Esem? You spent all this time, you wrote like a whole thesis, you wrote a whole book, you're like in the 5th volume of your S book, right? And you have all these teachings about S. What's going to happen? You're going to throw it all out? He says, Amrlahem, yes. Keshem Shekibalti Schala Drisha, just like I receive reward for learning all these things, Kach ani mekabel schala prisha, so too I'm going to receive reward from withdrawing from all these things. In other words, what he was after was not his own kavod, was his own creativity. What he was after was the truth. And he said, I was wrong. When we learn Torah, we get reward for our toil, for our efforts, and he got reward for all. He says, yeah, I get reward for writing all this, and I get reward for throwing it all out because I realized I made a mistake. Beautiful, powerful. It's not about, again, his own kavod, his own ego. He says, I made a mistake. I spent my life on this wrong pursuit, but Torah is about our pursuits, and sometimes we don't necessarily walk away with, we come to the right conclusion. Okay, so we get reward for abstaining as well. Okay, however, at Shabar Rabbi Kiva, who is known, he's most famous for recognizing value in every single thing in the Torah, and he learns that the word es, when it comes to fearing God, includes what? To include Torah scholars, including Torah scholars in that mitzvah. He says that yes, as wild as that is, Rabbi Kiva had this almost, one would argue, like exaggerated, not in a negative way, but this incredible view of Torah scholars, and he understood that included in the Torah scholars, included in the fear of God is the similar level of fear for Torah scholars. Let's go a little bit further. Vari Arla. What about Arla? Arla is another prohibition. What is the prohibition of Arla? That is the first 3 years of a fruit tree, you're not allowed to benefit from the fruit tree. It's only in the 4th year. Important to know. Usually doesn't come up so often, but it does come up in certain fruits. Usually, let's say, an apple tree in your backyard, the first 3 years doesn't taste like anything. It's only in the 4th year. So many fruits, it's only as it gets older that the fruit starts bearing good fruit. But some fruit, this really is a challenge. Okay, you're not allowed to eat things which are arla. From the pasuk, what do we see? That only includes eating. Where do we know you can't benefit from it? You cannot use it as dye. You can't use the fruit to kindle a lamp with it. Okay, the fact that it mentions it twice, to include all these things. So what do you see from there? The fact that Torah went out of its way to add to these prohibitions, that's why we learned an Isser Hana, prohibition against benefits. Halav Hachi, Havamina, Isser Chila Mashma, Isser Nala Mashma. Had it not repeated the prohibition against Allah, I would say it's only including a prohibition against eating and not a prohibition against benefits. So again, a question of Rav Abahu. So where it says lo, la'olam le'achel mashma bein isra chila bein isra na. Really, the words don't eat include both not eating and not benefiting. V'shani hasam, it's different over there. D'chsiv lachem. The fact is, in the context of Arla, it said to you, v'itzrich. And therefore, I need all this. Since the pasuk, I would have thought, since it says to you, it's to you. Therefore, you'd think that you're allowed to have benefit from it. You may not allowed to be eat it, but from the word lachem to you would imply you're allowed to benefit from it. Kamash blan, that's why it's to add to the prohibition to say you're not allowed to benefit from it. So once we're saying you can't benefit from it, so why not save this whole headache? Just don't write the word lachem, and then you don't need the extra words to say that benefits included. We're about to turn the page 22 before lachem comes to include the rabbin. To include the prohibition of arla is not only privately owned fruit trees, but also publicly owned ones. Yehuda disagrees and says it comes to exclude that which is planted for the public use. My time Tanakama. What's the reason for the Tanakama? The pasuk says when you plant in the singular, implies that it's only relevant for the individual. And then when it says to you, which is plural, to come to include the prohibition of arla for that which is planted for the public. Rabbi Yehuda disagrees. He says you plant, that actually that term is both implying singular and plural. And to you implies both for the individual and for the public. Have a riboy, so there is a to you and then followed by a to you, two inclusions. Whenever you have two inclusions, actually the Torah there's a principle that comes to exclude, and therefore he learns that it does not include that that's planted for the public. Now I'll just mention, very important, that orla is biblical in Israel, and therefore when you're shopping for fruit, it's important that you get something, as crazy as it sounds. When it comes to fruit, there's a number of prohibitions that apply in Israel, and therefore you want to look for a hechsher to tell you that these fruits are not actually orla, to tell you that you're not going to be in violation of a biblical prohibition. In America, it is only rabbinically prohibited, and therefore if you have a question, if you know it's your own fruit tree, you'd have to be careful not to have benefit from the first 3 years, but if you do not know, if there's a suffix, you're able to be rely on the assumption that it is not problematic, and therefore in a situation where you go to the store and you buy and you don't know if it's first 3 years or the 4th year, you're allowed to rely on the fact that it's maybe it's after the 3rd year, and therefore you typically do not have to think about orla too much when we're shopping in America, but in Israel, again, you have to be very careful. Have a great day.